I want people across this country to know that story, the real story of the South Side.
In the history of the United States, there has never been a more empowering, intelligent, or charismatic First Lady as Michelle Obama. On track to being the best-selling memoir of all time, her book, Becoming, allows readers an intimate look behind the doors of the historic Pennsylvania Avenue address and into the world of First Lady and First Family.
Definitely the most modern First Lady we've ever had.
Success is not about the background you're from. It's about the confidence that you have and the effort you're willing to invest.
Michelle Obama was able to balance the ambition of Hillary Clinton with some of the warmth and caringness in ways that really hadn't been seen before.
One of Michelle's greatest, I think, qualities is that she comes across as powerful, but relatable. People who have met her, who have spent time with her, say that she is aspirational, but at the same time, very relatable. She puts people immediately at ease. She shows a genuine, thoughtful interest in people when she meets them. She's also very down to earth and very much feels like someone you can talk to.
I was a sociology major. Oh my goodness, write my recommendation letter, please. You got it. You got it. I got you covered.
Seize your moment, girl.
Michelle LaVaughn Robinson grew up in the south side of Chicago. It was primarily a white area when she moved in, and then it became a mostly African-American area by the time she left. She grew up with a very working class family. Her dad was a shift worker. He put on his uniform every day. Her mother went back to work in order to support the family, help raise the kids. She grew up with her brother, Craig. They lived in a very small apartment above a home that her aunt owned. And basically the living room was cut up into like 3 living spaces. And she had a very small single bedroom with just a partition between her and her brother. In fact, it didn't actually go to the ceiling. So she and her brother, Craig, would like throw a sock over back and forth at night. And they'd be like, "You up, Craig?" "Yeah, I'm awake." It was a very simple, humble beginning. But Michelle says that it was fundamental to her growth and development. Her parents gave her the foundation and the determination to succeed. Michelle says that her mom always said she was a little extra. She remembers vividly, even now, I think she was in kindergarten and she got the answer wrong on a colors test. And it bothered her so much that she went back to the teacher the next day and asked for a do-over, which she got, and she aced it. From the very beginning, Michelle Obama wanted to achieve. She wanted to get 100%. She wanted to be the best. And growing up in the south side of Chicago, she was not going to let her color, her socioeconomic position, anything hinder her from getting to the top.
Well, how on earth did you ever raise kids like Michelle and Craig in a place like South Shore? And my mom looks at these folks like they're crazy. And she says, Michelle and Craig are nothing special. There are millions of Craigs and Michelles out there. And I did the same thing that all those other parents did. She says, I loved them, I believed in them, and I didn't take any nonsense from them.
Their family was like Beaver Cleaver, that it was so wholesome, just they earned a little bit less money. But this really was an important foundation for her, and that she really loves family, loves being around family, and that family is really important to her. And that really shined through. Her warmth and her maternal energy was considered to be a huge asset.
I didn't want to let my parents down, so I worked hard in school. I read everything I could get my hands on. I did my absolute very best on every single assignment. I did everything in my power to be a good student. I dreamed of one day going to one of the best universities in America.
Michelle relates a very poignant story in the book about how when she was applying for colleges and wanted to go to Princeton, one of the guidance counselors at the school even though Michelle had, top of her class, great grades, she'd been active in extracurricular things, she said to her, "I don't think you're Princeton material." And, Michelle, what she did was she ignored it. She went to the assistant principal and got a recommendation from them instead. Michelle says, "I wasn't going to let one person's opinion of me dislodge everything about me that I knew was true." This is, to me, one of the most inspiring things about the entire book, Becoming, in that from the very beginning, Michelle has been telling other women not to let someone's opinion of you determine who you are, not just women, but everyone. And the fact is, Michelle herself faced people doubting her from such a young age, even in high school, but she didn't let it stop her from achieving her dreams.
And I wasn't even sure my family could afford the tuition. I didn't have anyone to help me study for entrance exams. And the fact that I was a girl and that I was Black, well, that certainly didn't help things either.
Michelle went on to Princeton, and everyone knows, of course, after that, she went to Harvard Law School, and she rose to the absolute top of her field. One of the other things that comes out in the book that's very compelling is that she hated being a lawyer. She'd gone to Harvard Law. She was at the top of her game. She was at a law firm, very prestigious, and she was doing all these court documents day in, day out. And she said to her mom, "I hate it. I hate being a lawyer." And her mom actually tried to talk her into staying as a lawyer because of how much money she was making. It was an incredible amount of money. And she said, "Okay, make your money and then later do something you love." Because what an amazing opportunity. But for Michelle, she realized that she had to follow her passion, which was helping people. It wasn't producing court documents. And of course, we all know what happened. Fans of Michelle Obama, people who've met her at events, always say the same thing. She is, on the one hand, their ideal, and on the other hand, she feels just like them. Michelle's incredible ability to embody something aspirational but also relatable reminds me of Oprah Winfrey, actually, where you have someone you see as a role model but also is able to make you feel that they're unpretentious and not intimidating in any way. It's a great skill, and it's something that Michelle has used to great effect throughout her career.
In August 1989, Michelle LaVaughn Robinson was working as an associate in the Chicago law firm Sidley Austin when she was assigned to mentor a summer intern. That summer intern was Barack Hussein Obama.
While Michelle was at Sidley Austin, in comes a summer intern, Barack Obama. Barack was basically her mentee. I mean, she was his mentor. So he had come in new to the firm. She was already experienced, and she was kind of his babysitter in a way, showing him around, introducing him to people. She says now that she thought he was like handsome and bright and lovely, but she never thought about dating him. It wasn't that kind of connection. In fact, she even talks about thinking to set him up with one of her friends, and then he wore some kind of weird outfit that looked like he was out of Miami Vice with a white linen jacket, and that just went down the drain. So she's very candid in her book about the fact that it wasn't love at first sight, that he had this distinct whiff of geekiness about him, and she saw him as being amazing and great, but not dating marriage material. I think he kind of grew on her, but rather quickly, because once they actually did have their first date, Michelle says it was almost immediate that she knew that this was going to be something pretty incredible.
He was definitely pursuing her, and she had her reservations, and eventually he won her over.
One of the things that really unites Michelle and Barack is they have a rather disruptive sense of humor. They sort of are not mainstream. They have their own kind of sardonic, cynical views on things, and they love to give each other a hard time. But they were early on in their courting stage, and they went to see Les Mis, the musical, together. And, everyone loves Les Mis, the soaring music and the wonderful themes. And she says it just felt like grunts and chains to her. She hated it, which is not normal, but she hated it. And anyway, during the intermission, she turns to look at Barack And he just looks at her, kind of looks up in one eye, goes, horrible, right? And it's just, he knew that's what she was thinking, and she knew that's what he was thinking, and they really share that. They have their own shared sense of humor. They have their own shared jokes. They give each other a hard time. They push each other to do better. And I think that's one of the reasons they're still together, and it's magic.
If I had worried about who liked me and who thought I was cute when I was your age, I wouldn't be married to the President of the United States today. So.
Well, actually, even now, there's very famously a plaque outside the Baskin-Robbins in Chicago where Barack and Michelle had their first kiss. Barack wrote in his memoirs that I kissed her and it tasted like chocolate, and they'd had ice cream at Baskin-Robbins. So there's a plaque actually outside to this day.
Right, I think one of the things that stands out in the relationship between Barack and Michelle Obama is just how close they are, how much they are equal partners, how they see themselves as a team. That their relationship isn't perfect, but they tend to be honest about whatever issues they have with one another. But it's very clear to see that they have such a strong love for one another.
One of the biggest revelations in Michelle's book, Becoming, is her own painful struggle to have children. We find out that Michelle had a very painful miscarriage prior to having her daughters, and then was forced to rely on IVF for the successful conception of her two girls, Malia and Sasha. This was something she writes about in really breathtaking detail. She talks about the loneliness of, injecting herself at 9 o'clock at night somewhere with the hormone she needed, how the fact that Barack was often gone or traveling was difficult as she was contemplating the IVF and doing the IVF. She's very honest about it and very candid about her own struggles to have her girls. And this is something we never knew before. Michelle is very honest in her book, Becoming, about her and Barack's marital difficulties. She doesn't paint a perfect picture of their marriage. In fact, she actually said in an interview with Oprah Winfrey for Harper's Bazaar that, yes, I know people see us as #relationship goals, but it's not as picture perfect as it may seem. I think for Michelle, it was important to paint a more accurate, realistic picture of the fact that you have two very intelligent, very driven, very ambitious people who are trying to find a way to have a successful partnership and marriage. One of the things Michelle talks about is how her way of loving and her feeling of security was different than Barack's. Barack didn't grow up near his mother. He was raised by his grandparents, and yet he knew his mother loved him very much. For Michelle, she wanted him present. She wanted her husband around her. That's how she felt loved and secure. But for Barack, it didn't need to be that way. So I think Michelle's very honest and open about the fact that she and Barack had to find a way to love each other and also be true to themselves. And she openly talks about the fact that the pair underwent couples counseling shortly after the birth of their daughters. Michelle Obama will never run for political office. She has made that abundantly clear. People I know who actually know her have said there's less than 1% chance that that would ever happen. Although there have been opinion polls which show repeatedly that Michelle Obama would be a popular candidate, would have a lot of support. Certainly, if you look at the response her autobiography, Becoming, has had, you'll see that she's incredibly popular. However, Michelle Obama has said repeatedly that she despises the kind of nastiness in politics, which to a great degree in our current system seems to be necessary. She has no interest or desire to hold public office. In fact, her husband, Barack, even said very famously that he's sure of like 3 things in life: death, taxes, and Michelle Obama will never run for office. So we know that that is absolutely not one of her aspirations.
In the lead up to the election campaign in 2008, it was just tremendous turmoil, discontent, because the economy had been doing so badly. There was one point in 2008 that 170,000 jobs were being lost in a month. Unemployment was almost at 8%, and there was real pessimism and concern about the U.S.'s future. I mean, there was a general consensus that the invasion of Iraq had not been going well, that the U.S. had overstretched itself.
I think there was a general malaise and suspicion of politicians. We had been kind of mired in this murky war in Iraq, and it didn't even seem like we'd done that for the reasons that we were told. We've been lied to. And I think a lot of Americans were deeply angry and suspicious. So here comes this guy who seems kind of anti-establishment. Barack was a young senator. He didn't have a lot of political experience. Up until that time, he was the presidential candidate with the least amount of experience. And I think that people found his dynamic, young optimism. He seemed like a Black JFK.
We are all connected as a people, that all of us share something, that these children right here lined up waiting for the red hot chili peppers, that I've got an investment in them even though they're not my children. Just like you have an investment in the children in the south side of Chicago who are trying to figure out whether they've got a decent education.
And people were longing for something like that. The kind of old, rich white men had really done us wrong. We were tired of feeling like we were part of some white elitist Yale University, guy that passes it down to his son. And it just felt very old school. The Obamas were a breath of fresh air, literally. And even people who were diehard Republicans, diametrically opposed to every single policy position, like my mother, loved them because she said, this is what we need. We need this kind of breath of fresh air. We need this kind of new energy to be brought into the White House.
I think it was difficult for Michelle to come to terms with the fact that Barack wanted a political career. She's very civic-minded, but she hates politics. And so she really didn't want to get into any kind of career where there would be mudslinging and all the different things that come with it. But as always, she wanted to support Barack in whatever aspirations that he had. I think she understood that he had aspirations for greatness and was capable of achieving these types of things. And that he's sort of a once-in-a-lifetime type of person, that a type of candidate that the world had never really seen before, definitely the US had never seen before, and that she was going to need to support him. And that didn't necessarily mean that she had to let go of her own ambitions. It just meant, that she needed to be side by side with him and supporting him all along the way. I'm sure she was one of his biggest fans, but also one of the people that he trusted the most in terms of offering him advice.
Michelle herself has always been very ambitious and career-driven, and she's been very open about the fact that it was really difficult to subjugate her own desires and ambitions in order to support his. There were many points during the early election campaigns and his run for Senate where she had to kind of suck it up and deal with the family stuff, deal with the IVF, deal with the girls and the girls' schedule. And he wasn't home. He was not present. He was out campaigning on the campaign trail, or he was in a meeting. He was in Washington. And she did. And she said it was not an easy decision, and it was not an easy thing to do because she had her own dreams and ambitions, and she had to sublimate those in order to support him. But she doesn't regret it, and it was the right thing to do. And she found her own voice as First Lady. But I love the fact that she was so honest about the fact that she had her own degree. She had her own law degree. She was his boss. And now she had to kind of put that aside to some degree in order to help him achieve his dream. She tells a famous story in her book about they were lying in bed together one day and he was looking off into the distance. And she very famously said to him, a penny for your thoughts, and thinking perhaps he might be thinking about their relationship or their impending marriage. And instead he said, very truthfully, I'm thinking about income inequality. So he was a very serious-minded, smart guy. And Michelle knew he had great political aspirations, but she's very candid about the fact that she didn't actually think he would win or could win the presidency. She says, ultimately he was a Black man in America, and I didn't think he could win. She supported him, but she had reservations and doubts. She doubted whether it would be good for their family, whether it would be good for him and her and their marriage, and all kinds of things. However, when it became clear to Michelle that her husband was really set on running, she decided to support him wholeheartedly. In fact, there was one stage where she did something like 38 campaign appearances in just a number of weeks. She was very much behind him in his drive for the White House, even if she had her own private doubts, both about whether it was something good for them and also about whether it was even possible for him to get elected.
When she was originally campaigning with Barack in 2008, what's impossible to think of now is that she was thought of as a liability because of several things that she had said. She was being interviewed by reporters in early 2008, and she had mentioned, "This is the first time in my adult life that I am proud to be an American." And this really didn't play well. People didn't like the fact that she was emphasizing race too much. Then her dissertation was published when she was a student, which emphasized how difficult it would be to be an African American in a white university. That also didn't play over very well. And there were caricatures of her as this angry Black woman who was militant and was overly focusing on race. And they decided that they were going to basically give her a complete makeover, a complete image makeover, because they felt that she was coming across as too forceful.
The world as it should be. So tonight, in honor of my father's memory and my daughter's future, out of the gratitude for those whose triumphs we mark this week and those whose everyday sacrifices have brought us to this moment, let us devote ourselves to finishing their work. Let us work together to fulfill their hopes, and let's stand together to elect Barack Obama, President of the United States of America. Thank you. God bless you, and God bless America.
We see kind of a softer, gentler version of Michelle. Like a lot of first ladies, including Hillary Clinton, she had been told in no uncertain terms to kind of soften her approach. She was already getting criticized as an angry Black woman, and the misogyny and racism in that is very apparent. But for Michelle, in terms of helping her husband and not being a negativity to the campaign, she was told to, her advisors clearly were working to soften her appearance, make her come across as more motherly, more gentle. It's something that Hillary Clinton had to do as well. You have this incredibly educated, in Michelle's case, Harvard lawyer, who has to appeal to all people and all women, and being a smart career woman apparently was off-putting to a large demographic of women in America.
I think the problem was the sides of her that were maternal and warm weren't really shining through. And they felt that they needed to tap into these sides. It wasn't that they completely changed her personality. It's that they sort of edited her personality. It's an edited version of the way she really is, which she was able to later reveal, just being a little bit more frank, more honest about things. And her honesty actually just appealed to people.
Now you know why I asked her out so many times, even though she said no. You want a persistent president.
Michelle Obama is famous for a lot of things, not the least of which is her enviable arms. One of the things we saw from her as First Lady was the first time a First Lady started wearing high street brands. She was wearing J. Crew, she was wearing other brands which were very mainstream. It wasn't like Nancy Reagan and her Oscar de la Renta all the time. She was mixing and matching designer labels with high street mainstream brands, which is what, of course, most women do. We very famously saw her supporting J. Crew from the very beginning, which is a very quintessentially American brand. And she wore a lot of sleeveless tops. And of course, the whole world took notice of the fact that she had such great arms. Michelle Obama's arms, in fact, were requested of plastic surgeons around the land by women who wanted to emulate their beauty, really. Michelle Obama has a great wardrobe, and the fact that she's 5'11" has incredible height and stature in which to show it off. She took risks in terms of fashion. She wore outfits that were a bit sexy and glamorous. She wore Versace very famously and looked very slinky and straightened her hair. She was not afraid to take risks with fashion, and she loves fashion, and it shows.
Ladies and gentlemen, the First Lady of the United States, Michelle Obama.
I realized that if I worked hard enough, I could do just as well as anyone else. I realized that success is not about the background you're from. It's about the confidence that you have and the effort you're willing to invest.
When Michelle Obama realized they actually were going to win the White House, she spent a lot of time talking to former first ladies about the effect it would have on her daughters. She talked to Laura Bush, she talked to Hillary Clinton, specifically about how she could protect her two girls from the glare of the national spotlight and how she could raise them to be well-adjusted women in the White House. For Michelle, her daughters were always a major priority to her, and giving them a sense of normalcy in the midst of the glare of the world in the White House was really important to her. A friend of mine who worked at the White House in the Obama years said that she only ever saw Malia once on the White House grounds, and she was carrying a laundry basket. So it seemed like she certainly had like normal chores. Michelle was very protective of her girls and tried to keep them away from the international spotlight. They didn't do a lot of big formal events. She tried very much for them to have a normal school life, and family dinner hour at 6:30 was absolutely imperative. In fact, people who worked at the White House say that at 6:15, they would all kind of be checking their watches because they knew that by 6:30, Barack had to leave to go to the family residence to have dinner with his girls every night at 6:30. For Michelle, I think she took her role as protector and mother as seriously as she took anything else, or maybe more seriously than she took anything else. Whilst she has called being First Lady the greatest honor of her life, there was no question that her girls, her daughters, were her biggest priority, and protecting them, nurturing them, fostering a great childhood and adolescence for them was definitely something that got her full attention.
Most first ladies are expected to be supportive, to stay out of politics, to stay out of controversies, to choose to get behind policies that are non-controversial, and they weren't expected necessarily to have a career other than being a supportive political wife. And that really was the mold. Hillary Clinton broke the mold before Michelle Obama in some ways because she herself was such an ambitious person. But the key difference here is Hillary Clinton always had political aspirations, and this would dog her time period while she was Bill Clinton's wife. Because of all the different scandals going on, there were questions as to why they were even together. And many were very cynical about the fact that, well, this is because she one day wants to be, a politician, a senator, the president, and so forth. Michelle Obama was able to balance the ambition of Hillary Clinton with some of the warmth and caringness that previous First Ladies were able to exude in ways that really hadn't been seen before.
Michelle Obama's approach to being a first lady was different than, say, Hillary Clinton. She was not part of Obama's administration. She did not try to take the lead as a political leader, but she had her passions and her causes, and she was very vocal about those things. The theme, really, of Michelle's causes is really about inclusivity. She was looking for people and demographics that might have been marginalized and trying to give them a seat at the table. So we're talking about people of color, we're talking about girls, we're talking about gays and lesbians, transgender. She was looking to increase inclusivity, and that was definitely a theme of her passions and the causes that she really cared about.
Our glorious diversity, our diversities of faiths and colors and creeds, that is not a threat to who we are. It makes us who we are.
Now, Michelle Obama's 5'11". She's extremely tall, and she wore heels all the time. She was someone who is proud of her stature and in no way a shrinking violet by any circumstance. People who have met her have said that she's incredibly impressive for her strength and her height and her persona and her presence. But she also liked to sneak out of the White House, and she would do it frequently in disguise. Despite her height and her elegance in stature, she was very often able, in fact, to do just that. There's a wonderful story in Michelle's book about how she and her daughters wanted to celebrate the moment that same-sex marriage was legalized in the US. It was an historic moment for gay rights. And this was a subject and a topic that Michelle had been really passionate about from the beginning. You know, she said, we teach our children about equality and fairness, and she wanted so much for the US to acknowledge that gays and lesbians have the right to get married. She compared it to the civil rights movement and how this was a human fundamental right that they deserved. And she was so excited when it was finally made legal. The White House was actually dressed in all the lights, the colors of the rainbow flag. And she said to her girls, come on, let's go see it. She wanted to be a part of that historic moment. So they actually snuck out of the White House and stood in front of it so that they could see the White House bathed in the colors of the rainbow flag. It was a great moment, and it was a very fun part of the story of the book.
And now today, being back here in London, while looking out at all of your faces, I'm once again filled with the same feeling I had 6 years ago. I see a room full of business leaders and surgeons and barristers. I see women who are going to win elections and science competitions and arts awards. I see leaders who will inspire folks not just here in Tower Hamlets, but all across the country and all around the world. That's what I see. Because I know what's inside of girls like you and like me. I know how hard we'll fight for our families, how deeply we care about our communities, how much of a difference we can make for those around us.
If you look at her career as a first lady, she chose issues that were really apolitical. She wanted to improve the livelihoods of veterans and their families. She worked to improve nutrition for children and to improve their mobility and physical fitness. And she really cared, about families, and that's what she emphasized in the end. Something that really wasn't going to be controversial in any way, shouldn't have been controversial. At times, it was controversial just because the first family was on the receiving end of criticism from time to time. But in the end, she had very high popularity ratings, higher than Barack Obama's popularity ratings. And now, as people are looking back on her career as a first lady, she's one of the most well-loved first ladies in history, and one of the most admired people in the US just recently.
Michelle Obama is famously tactile and warm, and we've seen that over and over again. But in 2009 at the G2 summit, there was a faux pas heard around the world when Michelle actually put her arm around Queen Elizabeth. Everyone was shocked because this is a firm break with royal protocol. Michelle and the Queen had actually been having a bit of a giggle because they were both talking about how uncomfortable their shoes are. Queen Elizabeth apparently complimented Michelle on her Jimmy Choos. And Michelle confided that they were incredibly uncomfortable. And Queen Elizabeth said apparently hers were as well. And they had a bit of a laugh. And Michelle put her arm around the Queen, which caused gasps, which could be heard around the world. The thing is, Queen Elizabeth seemed to like it. There was a stage later on where Queen Elizabeth invited Michelle to sit in the back of her Range Rover with her on the way somewhere. And when Michelle hesitated, the Queen said to Michelle, have they warned you that you can't do this? And when she said yes, the Queen said, rubbish, you can sit wherever you want. So it seems like, despite the fact that everyone in the world freaked out that Michelle put her arm around Queen Elizabeth was in fact charmed, very much so, by Michelle Obama. You know, we saw the very famous friendship that developed between Michelle Obama and George W. Bush, a very unlikely pairing. But what happened was Michelle was invariably always seated by the former president, George W. Bush, at funerals, public events, and they got to become friendly. George Bush very famously gave Michelle Obama a cough drop, which was at John McCain's funeral, and everybody saw that. And actually, Michelle said it was an old cough drop. It had been there a long time in the bottom of Laura's purse, but she took it, and they became really firm friends. There's a lot of photographs of them at events where she has her arms around him, you know, embracing him. And she has said, I don't agree with him on everything, but I have so much love for this man. You know, George W. Bush has said, you know, she likes my sense of humor, and anyone who likes my sense of humor, I like them immediately. I think one of the things Michelle has done so beautifully is to show that friendship and warmth does not have to stop when you come to different political views, the red and the blues, the Republicans and the Democrats. It doesn't have to be a barrier to good conversation and goodwill and good relations. And her friendship with George W. Bush has really embodied that. Michelle Obama has said over and over again, I can't ask something of our children, of our future generation, that I don't embody myself. This has fed into the way she acts all the time when it comes to campaign tactics, when it comes to personal relationships, and when it comes to the way that she speaks about her political opponents.
It was clear to the world each and every day that the Obama administration held office, that the Obamas, as the first family, shared an unparalleled love and closeness. Michelle Obama's mother, Marion Shields Robinson, lived in the White House to maintain those strong family bonds. In an interview with CBS in 2018, Marion Shields Robinson shared her reasons for moving into the White House and keeping the family as close as possible.
Michelle Obama is incredibly close to her mother. And she always admired her mother. Her mother was always there for her, you know, at home cooking every meal. And she had a really, really idyllic upbringing. And this close-knit family, in some ways, it was something that Barack Obama lacked because his parents had split up and he moved around quite a bit. But I think that the decision for Michelle's mom to move into the White House with them illustrates how close they really are, how much Michelle relies on her mom to support her and to just be there for their daughters and to provide the family a foundation and some normalcy. The media even nicknamed her the first grandmother. I think some families, having your mother-in-law live with you wouldn't be ideal, but that, you know, you really don't understand how close this family is and how supportive, you know, she is to their daughters, but also to Barack and Michelle.
And I've seen it again and again and again, that what our parents told us really is true. That if we get our education, we can do anything. We can lift up ourselves to heights we could never imagine. We can pay forward all of the love and support that our families have poured into us. And we can truly be builders of a new day. That is your work.
One of the things Michelle did, which was unusual, was that shortly after she moved into the White House with her girls, she moved her mother in. Mary Ann Shields Robinson became the first grandmother of the White House. For Michelle, she knew she was going to be unavailable to her girls sometimes, whether she was accompanying Barack on a trip overseas or she had meetings. And she wanted someone she knew and trusted to help her raise her daughters. You know, as busy as she got, she never took her eye off the ball when it came to raising Malia and Sasha. And I think moving her mother in was something that families do, but it's not typically something that first families do. I think what a lot of people who know Michelle Obama say about her is she's hilarious. She has a great sense of humor, and she's really funny. One of the great dynamics between Michelle and her husband is there's a friendly competitiveness. They are famously competitive with each other. A friend of mine who was actually at the 2004 convention when Barack's keynote speech thrust him into the national spotlight. Just before he went on stage, Michelle gave him a big hug and said, "Don't screw it up, buddy." So Michelle has a very famously competitive, very kind of funny, competitive relationship with her husband. And in her book, Becoming, it's really remarkable how much shade she throws at her husband, where she talks about his whiff of geekiness on their date and other things that make him seem very human.
I think for Barack and Michelle's children, Sasha and Malia, growing up in the White House probably wasn't easy. They had some advice from the previous first children, the Bush twins, Jenna and Barbara Bush. They actually took them under their wing and gave them a lot of helpful advice. But one of the things that made it easier for them was that they had such a strong family. They had their grandmother living with them. They had their mother ensuring that, you know, they're able to live as normally as possible. And something that is notable about those 8 years for them was that there was never anything negatively reported on them, ever. And it could be, you know, the media was, you know, exercising some caution there. But even since they have now, you know, become younger adults and are no longer living in the White House, they have earned a reputation for just being really solid, well-behaved girls that have been really raised well. And a lot of this has been attributed to the work that, you know, Michelle had done in the White House, but also Michelle and Barack as a family, just ensuring that they had some level of stability and normalcy, you know, in spite of the fact that they were living in very abnormal conditions.
Earlier today, as you heard, Malia and Sasha and I visited the Long Room at Trinity College. As you know, I don't know if many of you have been there, it's like Hogwarts. As Sasha pointed out, it's a huge room with shelf after shelf full of books. A beautiful place, and I hope that all of you aspire to go there, if not study there, but just to go and experience what it's like to be surrounded by so much history and so much power. And the girls had the chance to explore those shelves and trace their Irish and lineage, which was a very powerful thing to find out that these girls that were born on the south side of Chicago can trace their roots back here to Ireland, way back to the 1600s. That was very powerful for me as their mother, and hopefully it will be something that they cherish for the rest of their lives.
One of the things Michelle is best known for is the fact that she's an incredible public speaker. And some say that she's even better, or let's say as good as her very famous husband. Michelle and Barack were actually quite competitive about their speeches. When Michelle was prepping to give her 2016 Democratic Convention speech, which is the very famous one where she says, "When they go low, we go high," Barack heard her in one of the rehearsals and ended up going back to his notes to work a bit harder to make sure he was as good or better than his wife. Michelle is a famously good public speaker. She has great presence, she has great authority, and at the same time, she manages to be interesting and relatable. It's one of her best skills.
You know, it's hard to believe that it has been 8 years since I first came to this convention to talk with you about why I thought my husband should be president. Remember how I told you about his character and conviction, his decency and his grace, the traits that we've seen every day that he served our country in the White House. I also told you about our daughters, how they are the heart of our hearts, the center of our world, and during our time in the White House, we've had the joy of watching them grow from bubbly little girls into poised young women, a journey that started soon after we arrived in Washington, when they set off for their first day at their new school. I will never forget that winter morning as I watched our girls, just 7 and 10 years old, pile into those black SUVs with all those big men with guns. And I saw their little faces pressed up against the window, and the only thing I could think was, what have we done? See, because at that moment, I realized that our time in the White House would form the foundation for who they would become. And how well we managed this experience could truly make or break them. That is what Barack and I think about every day as we try to guide and protect our girls through the challenges of this unusual life in the spotlight.
Barack and Michelle Obama had an excellent relationship throughout the presidency. I mean, any relationship is going to be tested when you're dealing with high levels of stress. And so it's not to say that their relationship didn't experience some bumps and some tense discussions along the way, and they've admitted that. But they see themselves as a team. They see themselves as much stronger together than apart, and they really respect each other. They see each other as equals. And I think during the entire presidency, they were able to weather a lot of storms, difficult storms that he faced, just being president and all the attacks he faced. They were able to weather this together, and their relationship is probably stronger as a result. But it's really one of the few political marriages that was just completely scandal-free, that was really about a deep love that they shared for one another, that wasn't really about a marriage of political convenience. And, both Republicans and Democrats alike would have to acknowledge that this was a very solid relationship. It was a model relationship, and one that a lot of other people could learn from.
The issues that Michelle focused on in her reign as First Lady, which were like healthy kids, education, these were not just for show. People I know who spent time with Michelle say that she was incredibly passionate, even in her private life, about these issues. She would meet a teacher at an event where there were no cameras and no reporters and spend time really engaging them to talk about how we can do better for kids' education, or how we can do more to get kids moving and healthier. Her drive to help fight childhood obesity was unprecedented. It was something that is obviously a very serious issue worldwide, and particularly in the US. And Michelle's Let's Move campaign was something that tackled it head on. She was very famously photographed on many occasions, jump roping, skip roping, dancing, all kinds of things to help children be encouraged to get away from their tablets and screens and get out there and get moving. She also very famously planted a vegetable garden at the White House. In the past, they had so many beautiful flowers and landscape gardeners, but Going back to Eleanor Roosevelt, this was the first time they'd had a first lady plant vegetables. And she was very much behind this campaign to encourage healthy eating, to encourage eating locally sourced produce, organic when possible. And so she made kind of a big deal about that and actually insisted that they plant a vegetable garden that they could actually eat from on the White House property.
We love good food too. That's why I always say there's nothing that the first family loves more than a good burger, right? And look, my favorite food in the whole wide world are French fries. I love them dearly, deeply. I have a good relationship with French fries, and I would eat them every single day if I could. I really would. You know, kids, you guys, young people, you guys have my heart. And I said this in Belfast earlier. It's so true. Look, my girls know I can embarrass them and love them to death, but young people, you guys move me in ways that you don't even imagine.
Michelle Obama's views were in line with Barack Obama about inclusivity and equality. And she knew that there were very high levels of inequality in the US still that really affected children. And one way of improving this was to ensure that children had access to healthy foods. And she made that one of the issues of her time as First Lady was to improve access to healthy lunches in schools, which is really critical for kids who are learning and need to have proper nutrition in order to absorb information well. She wanted to make sure that kids who were sedentary were moving better because these improvements to their physical health, she knew how critical that would be to improving their mental health. And she was a champion of exercising and being healthy and waking up early and eating healthy to the best of her ability. And she would go on talk shows and talk about this. And generally, this was well received. And she cared about children. She showed she cared about children. She cared about people who had been neglected in the past. She also supported Barack Obama's policies that fought for marriage equality and other forms of inclusivity. And both of them also were fighting for equal pay rights for women. And that was actually one of the signature pieces of his legislation during the first 100 days.
Let Girls Learn was one of her big causes, and she was instrumental in creating a campaign and a program that encouraged girls, especially girls at risk in minority and poor communities, to go to college, to have a great access to education, and to become leaders. Unfortunately, in Donald Trump's administration, the program was completely discontinued.
And I'm here because when I look out at all of these young women, I see myself. I may come from a country that's an ocean away, but I'm a bit older than you all. Yeah, I am. I know I don't look it, but I'm just a little older. When I was growing up, there were very few Black women at high levels in business or politics or science on TV. So I didn't have many professional role models to look up to. And I have a feeling that my experience might feel similar or familiar to some of you. Right now, there are more than 62 million girls around the world who are not in school. Girls whose families don't think they're worthy of an education or they can't afford it. Girls who live too far away from the nearest school and have no transportation. Girls like Malala Yousafzai, who are assaulted, kidnapped, or killed just for trying to learn. And this isn't just a devastating loss for these girls. It's a devastating loss for all of us who are missing out on their promise. One of these girls could have the potential to cure cancer or start a business that transforms an industry or become the next president or prime minister who inspires her country. But if she never sets foot in a classroom, chances are she will never discover or fulfill that potential. As I tell girls whenever I meet them, I wouldn't be here sitting here, not just in this chair, but in the life that I have, if it weren't for my education. I know that when you hear the phrase knowledge is power, it's true. Through my education, I didn't just develop skills, I didn't just develop the ability to learn, but I developed confidence. We were not put on this earth just to be good mothers or good wives. We were here to be good citizens and good individuals. And that takes investment. And I want girls to start practicing that at a very early age, not being so selfless that they can't look out for themselves.
Well, I think Michelle Obama is the first lady we've ever had that quoted Beyonce. I think she's the first lady who seemed cool. You know, we had the kind of Stepford wife persona of Laura Bush. We had the glamour, the kind of old stuffy glamour of Nancy Reagan. We had the kind of abrasive persona of Hillary Clinton and the pantsuits. But Michelle kind of took a bit of all of that. She was a strong, powerful woman with great arms who looked great, whether it was in a J. Crew sweater set or something by Versace. She quoted Beyonce. She was friends with Beyonce and Jay-Z. She wore Balenciaga boots. She is someone who is far more relatable, I think, in modern, definitely the most modern first lady we've ever had. I think Melania has taken us back a bit, but Michelle was very much of the now.
Hello, everyone, and may I say for the last time officially, welcome to the White House.
One of the things Michelle said, which was controversial, was when she said that she struggles with the fact that the White House, that the house she lived in all those years, was a house that was built by slaves. She said, you know, I wake up every morning in a house that was built by the sweat of slaves. And it was a comment that upset a lot of people, but it was an honest reaction, reflection on her part as to the history, the troubled history of America and slavery. There was another moment where Michelle talks about her very grumpy face at Donald Trump's inauguration. You know, she's very unsmiling and she actually looks annoyed during most of it. Barack is kind of affable, smiling, trying to be nice, but she just looks mad. And she was asked about it. And she said she was looking around, and whereas at her and Barack's inauguration, there had been a sea of faces of all minorities, of all colors, of both genders. And here it was looking at Donald Trump's inauguration, very, very white and very of a certain age and very male driven. And she said it looked like other kind of corridors of power that she'd been in before, where there weren't very many people of color. And it made her really sad because she thought we were riding a new wave and that the world had changed. But when Donald Trump came in and the people who supported him showed up for the inauguration, she saw that it was not the world that she thought we were now in.
There's tremendous nostalgia for the Obamas. I mean, look what the US is dealing with at the moment. It's just complete government disarray, investigations, disunity, polarization. It's very stressful for most Americans today in dealing with the current administration. And this is even though the US economy is actually doing fairly well. As a result, you know, a lot of Americans are really nostalgic about the Obamas. Those that were probably a little bit too critical of the Obamas, either on the left or on the right, at least recognize that it was a period of direction, calm, prudency, where the US could say that they were a world leader, that they held some moral high ground. And I think as we move on into this new era, a period of politics that is more polarized than ever, you're seeing the need for a type of chief executive who can comfort people, who can unite people, who's articulate, who's educated, who knows how to say the right things in the right moments and doesn't try to divide us.
I think the Obamas ultimately tried to please both sides. They tried to please the stalwart conservatives and also the modern liberal-minded Democrats. And I think they failed. I think what they proved is that it's not possible to please both sides. And now we're in an era where everyone's an extremist. You are really like a white supremacist or you're a socialist. There doesn't seem to be a lot of strength in the middle. And unfortunately, in these very divisive political times, the Obama approach just doesn't work.
So don't be afraid. You hear me? Young people, don't be afraid. Be focused. Be determined. Be hopeful. Be empowered. Empower yourselves with a good education. Then get out there and use that education to build a country worthy of your boundless promise. Lead by example with hope, never fear.
One of my favorite details in the book, if not my favorite, is when Michelle talks about making herself cheese toast. It was after they'd left the White House, she was no longer the first lady, and Barack and Michelle and the girls moved to a house in suburbs of Washington, D.C. And she writes about the fact that it was one of the first times in a very long time that she'd actually been alone. She was alone in her kitchen. She said at the White House, she couldn't even open a kitchen cupboard because someone's always there saying, "What do you need? What can I get for you?" But here in her own kitchen, it was like her and her dog, she opened her cupboard and she made herself cheese on toast. She toasted it and she sat outside on her stoop. There were dogs barking in the distance. And she actually said to her dog, because the dog was shocked there were dogs barking in the distance. Her dog had never heard other dogs. And she said, yeah, this is really it. This is our new reality. When Michelle talks about making herself cheese on toast and that moment where she sat backyard on the stoop, it's a moment of reflection on how her lives had changed, how all of their lives had changed and would never be the same.
I want to close today by simply saying thank you. Thank you for everything you do for our kids and for our country. Being your first lady has been the greatest honor of my life, and I hope I've made you proud.